Welcome to Annunciation Radio's Faith with Reasons, the program that examines what the church teaches and why. Faith with Reasons.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio. I'm Ron Finn along with Shayne Stanfield, and we continue to broadcast from our satellite studio, as it were, as our main studio is still a work in progress. Some damage on the outside wall, and that's being fixed right now. They're making progress, but we still are not allowed to go in that studio yet without a hard hat, and none of us own one. So. Shayne, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. I survived traffic coming over to this satellite location.
That's treacherous out there today.
It is.
It really is.
In two locations. I didn't think I'd make it, so blessed to be here.
Glad you're here, and glad to welcome our guest today. Now, today is the sixth day of the 54-day Rosary Novena, as we continue to pray and work toward the defeat of that horrible ballot issue on November 7th, issue 1. So as you continue to pray that rosary every day for that intention, there are prayers that you can get, pray54ohio.org, and you can get those in a daily email. And also, starting, I think yesterday, the 20 push-ups for life. Have you heard of this, Shayne?
I did, yeah.
So every day, you're encouraged to do 20 push-ups, representing the 20,000 Ohio abortions that happen every year. So a wonderful opportunity to really put a little sacrifice into your prayer routine.
For me, that would be a sacrifice.
Prayer in action, yeah, absolutely. All right, well, welcome to show number 461 or 462. I lose count. We've been on for quite a while, and we're very pleased to have an outstanding guest today, a voice that's probably familiar to you. If you listen at all to EWTN, you've heard Divine Intimacy Radio.
Oh, yeah.
Dan Burke is our guest today. He is the founder and president of the Avila Institute for Spiritual Formation, which is at avila-institute.com, offering graduate and personal enrichment studies in spiritual theology to priests, deacons, religious, and laity in more than 90 countries, and it prepares men for seminary in more than 40 dioceses.
Wow.
Dan is the author and editor of many books on authentic Catholic spirituality, and along with his wife Stephanie, hosts the Divine Intimacy Radio Show, broadcast weekly on EWTN stations, including Annunciation Radio. And you can find past episodes and really thousands of articles on the interior life at spiritualdirection.com. And Dan, I'm glad that we could pin you down. I know you're a busy guy, so thank you for joining us, and welcome to Faith with Reasons.
Well, it's great to be with you, Ron and Shayne. Appreciate you having me on.
You've got a wonderful book out. I think this is the most recent book, although you're writing all the time, but Finding Peace in the Storm. It's from Sophia Institute Press and available, of course, at Rieger's or your favorite Catholic bookstore. You can go online at sophiainstitute.com and at Sophia Institute's Facebook and Twitter or X pages. That sounds weird. But in this book, Dan explores St. Alphonsus Liguori's spiritual classic, Uniformity with God's Will. And I love this book. You add your own commentary and to really kind of make this timeless 18th century letter easy for us to grasp, and kind of puts everything in perspective for us, and kind of clears up anything that might be lost in some of the 18th century wording, right? So, Dan, first of all, thank you for writing this wonderful book. I can't wait to get into this and have you tell our listeners a little bit more about it. St. Alphonsus, of course, kind of assumes in his holy treatise that we should all desire perfection. And I don't know if everybody knows what he means by perfection, but the state where we embrace and seek to live the highest expression of the good that God intends for us. This is where we get off track, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and there's many ways to get off track, right? But I think that many people see the Catholic life as, I'm Catholic, that's it. I go to Mass on Sunday and I'm a good Catholic, or even more, and I'm a good, whatever the phrase is before, and I'm a good Catholic. But really what God calls us to be is saints. Jesus said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And what he didn't mean is be perfect in the sense that God is perfect, but he means conform your will, your desire, your heart, give all that you are to God to the greatest degree you're able in the limitations of your humanity, so that you can be an instrument of him, so that he can give you grace and peace, and so that he can give you a voice in the darkness to lead others to him. So there's many other so that, so to speak, but seeking perfection, walking the way of perfection, which is a title of a book of St. Teresa of Avila, one of his, Alphonsus Liguori's most influential saints in his life. Walking the way of perfection is simply just becoming more like God and allowing him to work in and through us to bring the world to salvation.
Now, we were discussing prior to the show, Dan, maybe we should get into this, some of your background that helped you write this book, because I was just walking into the conversation between Ron and yourself, that I guess Ron thought that this might have been something a bit of a challenge for you, but you didn't see it that way.
No, I mean, what I was mentioning is I came out of abuse, and I came out of a situation where, my stepfather fired a gun in our home and beat my mother and terrorized his kids, and there were a lot of emotional scars that led me to despair as a young man, and until I really purposed to find a reason to live, and I did. And Jesus, of course, that gave me hope. Coming to know the Lord. I'm Jewish by birth. Mm-hmm. Coming to recognize him as the Messiah gave me hope, but it didn't give me peace, because when you leave abuse, when you leave a home wherein you experience abuse, you don't leave the abuse. There's many interior scars. And so I wrestled for decades with overcoming, the voices in my head, fueled by people who should have loved instead of harmed, regarding worthlessness, regarding hopelessness, and all of that. And I did that through the very subject of this book, but through other works as well. This one I found to be the most hard-hitting and clear. The three are Jacques Philippe's Searching for and Maintaining Peace, which is a modern work, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Another 19th century work, which is Jean-Pierre de Caussade's Sacrament of the Present Moment. And then this one are just three books that are extraordinary in bringing a soul like mine, in this case, to understanding how God works and how he's involved in the midst of your pain, and how it isn't hopeless. It isn't, we live in a time where things are really getting worse in the church, it seems, and getting worse outside of the church in an exponential way. And what I really wanted to do was give folks this beautiful, powerful wisdom to help them to look up, really, is a great summary. To look up and not stare at the waves, and thereby become a beacon of light to people who are like me, who are just saying, please, how do I figure all this out?
Of course, it was so much. It seems to me so much more, personal with you and your own healing. But you bring up a great point, that we can use this book to help us find peace in the storm of life, because it doesn't necessarily need to be something deeply painful as personal abuse, but it could be just dealing with the challenges of every day. People can easily see despair on what's going on in the world around them today, and this seems like an excellent way to get out of that.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, I was involved in a large social media group, and I surveyed what I would categorize as devout Catholics. They're active in their faith. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was shocking to me in that survey was 8 out of 10 said that they struggled with negative thoughts, every week in their life at some point or another. And some said every day. But 8 out of 10, 80% said they struggled in some way that it was very hard for them to deal with. And so, as you note, it doesn't mean they all went through abuse or whatever, but it could mean, they lost a job, they've been through a divorce, they've lost a child. Life is just full of, this is a valley of tears as we pray. And it's difficult. The book really speaks to how it is that we overcome or understand and find peace in the midst of all this stuff that just can be incredibly difficult to understand, can draw us to despair or to doubt or to leaving the church or whatever, and realize God's present and at work. And boy, once you make that shift to understanding that he's present and at work in the hardest of things even, then we begin to ask, well, why? And that question opens up a whole other world of possibilities regarding how we might relate to him and to the difficult circumstances we face.
We're speaking with Dan Burke. Finding Peace in the Storm is the book that we're talking about. And, as we read St. Alphonsus Liguori, and of course others as well, you also cite St. Teresa of Avila and others, including Jacques Philippe, that are really kind of instructing, and this original treatise from the 18th century was an instruction to his spiritual daughters, to really seek that uniformity and to be content with what God wills and to seek what God wills for us. And that's not just in bad times, but in good times and in sunshine and cloud. It's easier said than done, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah, it's really actually very difficult. We're all sort of wired to take control of situations that we don't like, or to be upset about them, and to try to change them. And one of the things that Jacques Philippe says, which is a hard saying, and a standard that I think is not necessarily always possible to reach, but I think it's a good one, and that is nothing should ever shake our peace. And of course, what he's not saying is, I have a friend whose wife has terminal cancer, and she's in her 30s, and they've got children, and I'm not saying that. We actually had a radio interview, and like all of us were weeping on the radio. I don't know if it was great radio, but it was a beautiful moment. But I'm not saying that he shouldn't weep or that he shouldn't be concerned or that he shouldn't struggle. But in the end, there can be an underlying peace even in the midst of these kinds of tragedies, and I've experienced them myself, even as an adult, where we have a deep sense that God is present with us and that we're not alone, and that, for me, the reason I put the gun away when I was a young man and instead said, well, I'm going to choose life, I'm going to figure this out, was because I found a reason for suffering. There's a reason for why things are difficult. So that sort of macro resolution for me was, of course, in Jesus, in Christianity, in our faith. But then there's this micro reality, which is, but there's a million little moments where we have choices to make that are of eternal consequence, wherein God places us in circumstances that are intended to help us to come to deeper union with Him, help us to learn to love, help us, in our salvation. There's many, many ways I could express that. And we have a choice in these moments to either embrace what's happening or get angry and frustrated and resist and fight. And when we do that and we lose our peace, and this is where Jacques Philippe's advice is so important, we exit the presence of God. We, in a sense, replace Him with us, and we say, I don't like this. This has to go, whatever this is, or I don't like you, I don't like... And then we get off track, and that, often also leads us to sin. So it's about both that macro kind of high-level embrace that God is in control and that the world isn't just total chaos and controlled by political parties and whatever, and that there's a reason for everything that happens, and then living in the context of that reason wherein we find Him, we find healing, we find maturity. But we've got to gain that perspective, which this book gives.
I think it's probably helpful to look at maybe will. God's will is involved in everything. Don't we have two aspects, or maybe I don't know if it's necessarily two wills, but maybe there's two aspects of it where you have the God's divine will, and then you have His permissive will, and
sure.
and in the permissive will you find those terrible moments because God does allow these things to happen in order to bring something good out of it. And I would say something better. So at least I find my peace tied to that, that reality that, that God is involved because that this is occurring for a reason. And you mentioned earlier when you find reason in suffering, to me, I think that they're very closely tied with one another.
Yeah, I agree. And there's another kind of macro-micro division in this idea as well. So why is it that He has to allow for certain kinds of evil? It's an important point that we have to resolve on. I personally don't find it difficult. Some people do it. For me, the necessity of free will, and this is, of course, the teaching of the church, the necessity of free will and love that emerges out of that free will, and the necessity of that reality for us to even have a relationship with God that's a relationship in freedom requires, that things that be allowed to unfold as they will. And of course, in the original design, He didn't intend for us to live in the midst of sin and self-destruction. That wasn't Him. That was Adam and Eve and the original sin and the effect of all of that sin on mankind. Mm-hmm. So there's a necessity for Him permitting, because if you say, well, I want justice now, I want this all fixed now, this is not right, this shouldn't be happening. I mean, I have friends who are suffering in Armenia under Azerbaijani now attacks, which looks like another genocide is going to happen. And I can't really deal with this on a macro level, except to say I don't understand what God is doing, but I trust Him, and I don't want it to happen, and so I'm going to do what I can, which is to pray, right? So that's the macro issue. And it's hard. These are hard things to deal with. But what we can deal with is, like, I know why I suffered when I was a child. I know where He was when I was suffering. I know that the first verse in the second chapter of I think it's 1 Corinthians, maybe it's 2 Corinthians, but Paul says, we comfort others with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted. And so we learn to know God through our suffering, through joining our suffering with Jesus, through offering up our suffering for others, to be an active participant in the redemption of the world. And that shifts our emphasis from I don't like what's happening to actually becoming a part of what's happening. But, back to the division of permissive will or active will, we have to understand that He either causes or allows everything that occurs, and it's always, as you noted, for a good end. Reminds me of Romans 8:28, which says all things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to His purpose. So He's always working out a greater good, but if we rail against what He's doing and say, no, 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 we often rail against the very medicine that's necessary for the healing of our souls.
So you call this in the book a paralyzing cocktail.
Yes. Yeah. We cause a worse storm, right? The storm is already hard enough. and now we're mad at God, and we're shaking our fists in the air, and now we're sinning. So, it becomes this very destructive cocktail of doubt, despair, and narcissism, and we spiral downward, and we spiral into desolation. But when we embrace God's will, as Paul did, by the way, in incredible circumstances, he talked about the peace that passes understanding. And you know where the nut job did that? In prison.
Yeah.
Right? An apostle of Jesus Christ, inspired by the Holy Spirit. Either he's a complete nut job, or he knows something all of us need to know, and that is, in prison, all of his rights taken away. What's happening to him in that circumstances? He's heading to have a trial with Caesar because he's a Roman citizen and he has the right to that final trial. But he knows he's going to be crucified. Christians are already being killed in the thousands all around him. It's just delaying what's happening. It's giving him time to convert the guards and to exhort his brethren as he's moving towards this trial. And in the midst of all of his rights being taken away, his life is going to be taken from him. He says that you have the ability to know a peace that transcends all the insanity that you're facing. And either he's a liar and a lunatic, or he has something that we can all have, because God is not like an evil despot who promises things that he won't give. What he promises he will give.
Amen. And of course, we kind of put ourselves in our own little prisons as well as we become much more affected by the things that happen to us. We rail against God. We wish for a different outcome. We think to ourselves, boy, if I had been in control of that, it would have come out different. This just kind of plunges us deeper and deeper into a break, a disunity with God, as opposed to the truly joyful heart that rejoices in all things, which is obviously difficult to do, but it becomes easier if you kind of look at it in the perspective of uniformity with God. Knowing that God permits some things to happen, but there's always a greater good in mind. And so we just accept, even if we don't know what that greater good is. We don't understand what's happening to us, but we accept it. And that is a difficult thing for people to do. I've been there. We've all been there, and we're there every time we turn on the news.
Yeah. I think it's, of course, easier or harder for some. For me, I had a good biological father who was a provider. He wasn't really present when I was younger. But because he was a good provider, I had a sense that certain things would always be okay, and then that translates well to God. Certain things will always be okay. But then I suffered a lot in the midst of all of that from other people involved in my upbringing that told me the opposite or whatever. And so it's easy, just for listeners, some are going to go, like maybe I was 20 years ago, and say, it's easy for you to say, you don't understand what happened to me or what's going on in my life, or you don't understand that I have cancer, my husband just died of cancer and I have 6 kids, but the answer isn't, well, just get over it. Just realize God's present. What I did to become free is constantly memorize Scripture, especially about suffering in the New Testament, which kind of rewires your mind to think like God thinks about suffering, which is liberating in and of itself. It's healing, and constantly turn our hearts and minds back to God. What concupiscence does to us is that every moment where our minds are off of God and we're off track, our compass loses its orientation to true north, which is heaven. And so every day we have this opportunity, a new opportunity to wake up, to begin our day in prayer, which Alphonsus Liguori indicates in this book, and relying a lot on Teresa of Avila, that the way to this kind of peace is knowing Jesus, right? John of the Cross as well, I mentioned about that. Because that's what reorients our compass. That's what gets us back focused in the present moment. One of the strategies of the enemy is to get us, one, to the past in shame or regret, or into the future in fear. That one's really big right now, especially with all of the COVID-idiocy and all of the crazy stuff going on in the government and the world and the church. And so, and Jesus, what was his answer to that dilemma? He said, "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." King James is how I memorized it. I haven't fixed it in my head, but basically saying, look, today has enough troubles of its own. Just be with me now, because this is the only way you can be with me. You can't be with me tomorrow for sure. It may be you come to your judgment. And when I'm not in the past, I'm with you here. Would you just spend time with me? Would you just orient your heart and mind to me? Would you just allow me to help you understand what's happening? And we can walk together, and I will get you through this. You know, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Come unto me, all you who are laden and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Like he meant those things. He's not just, it's not just pious platitudes. It's real. And what I wanted to do with this book is bear testimony again to the world. He is trustworthy. He is present. He knows you. He loves you. He cares about you. He knows what's going on. It all has a reason, so you can be strong in the midst of that trial, whatever it is.
Well, that's what's so beautiful about this book. I kind of feel like Forrest Gump. You always explain things so I can understand them, Dan. And when you have your, you'll have the words of Saint Alphonsus, and then you'll interject with your own reflections that really kind of put that in perspective for us, which is so helpful. And then actually give us some actual keys, things that we can do, and that we can kind of help reorient our thinking and our heart a little bit to make this happen even more. We're getting ready to go to break. I hate to I don't want to ask you a 4-minute answer question as we go into this break here. So we will take this short break, and we'll come back and then continue finding peace in the storm. Dan Burke is our guest, and Dan is going to be rejoining us, and we'll pick it up from there. And I know Shayne will have a question here for you. I can see him chomping at the bit already. So a little bit of a break. We'll be right back here on Faith with Reasons, here on Annunciation Radio.
Friends for Life, this is Kevin Jory, Director of the Office for Life and Justice for Catholic Charities. An extreme amendment is on the Ohio ballot in November that threatens the health and safety of women, the rights of parents, and the lives of preborn babies up to 9 months. Bishop Daniel E. Thomas, along with all the bishops of Ohio, invite the faithful to join the 54-day Rosary Novena starting September 15th for the defeat of this amendment. Sign up for daily email reminders with novena prayers at pray54ohio.org.
This is the day. This is the theme for this year's annual Catholic Appeal. Hello, everyone. Bishop Daniel Thomas here. Day by day, all of us are blessed by our Lord, and we know that as Catholics, we're charged with sharing our blessings with others. Your participation in our annual Catholic Appeal brings immediate help to individuals and families in crisis with food, counseling, care, and compassion. Your gift assists in Catholic education of our young people, promotes our priestly vocations, provides liturgical resources throughout our diocese, and so much more. This is the day. I invite you this day to please give generously to our annual Catholic Appeal at your parish or online at acatoledo.org. So grateful for your generosity to our annual Catholic Appeal. We depend on your goodness. God bless you.
Jesus promises us, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, then I will enter his house and dine with him, and he with me." Jesus longs to be invited into our hearts and into our homes. We see firsthand that lives are transformed through the enthronement of the Sacred Heart. open the door and welcome his heart. Visit welcomehisheart.com to learn more about this life-changing devotion.
Now, back to Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio.
Hey, welcome back here. Shayne Stanfield with Ron Finn, and today we're blessed to have with us Dan Burke, who's the founder and president of the Avila Institute for Spiritual Formation, offers graduate and personal enrichment studies in spiritual theology to priests, deacons, religious, and laity in more than 90 countries, and prepares men for seminary in more than 40 dioceses. That's pretty impressive. Dan is the author and editor of many books on authentic Catholic spirituality, and with his wife Stephanie hosts the Divine Intimacy radio show, which is broadcast weekly on EWTN radio. Past episodes can be found along with thousands of articles on the interior life at spiritualdirection.com. Today we're discussing with Dan his latest work, Uniformity with God's Will. I'm sorry, that's Alphonsus Liguori's book. He has written Finding Peace in the Storm, which is basically he's written his own commentary to make this 18th century classic, Uniformity of God's Will, easier to read for us. And I think it's that personal commentary that is extremely helpful. Because we've got a lot of lessons here to put into practice during this troubling time that we have today. As we shared the first half hour, Dan has a past where this work has personally helped him, but this is obviously something that can help many that are struggling with life today. On a day-to-day basis, whether it's being too consumed with the horrible news that we're bombarded with every day, or it could be just family life in general. Whether it's personal health problems, maybe loss of a job. These are all things that challenge us each and every day. We were just talking about how we focus on the moment, the here and now, instead of worrying about what may happen in the future, or dealing with things in the past. And Christ is always trying to get us to settle down and to listen to his word. And we were talking about morning prayer previously that I find especially helpful to begin my day. With scripture reading and reflections and things like this, but it helps carry Christ through the day. And I'm speaking personally here, but it is really something that's necessary for us to find this peace. And of course, it's not our peace; it's supernatural peace that Christ is certainly willing to give. Dan, maybe we can take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the secrets that Alphonsus points us to, which is that reorientation of our compass. But I think a good story in the Gospels is a good circumstance in the Gospels to compare it to, and then talk about the practicals, is Peter on the boat in the midst of the storm with the disciples, and Jesus is supposedly asleep. I don't think he was. I think he appeared to be, of course.
He was faking.
Well, what does he do? It's what he does, right? He's allowing things to unfold and allowing us to experience them, and then experience him in the midst of them on purpose so that we can come to know him. And so, of course, no, I'm sorry. I'm talking now. I'm mixing up stories. This is the one. This is another incident, another storm, and Jesus is I think was walking toward the boat. That's the right one. Mm-hmm. And so. He's walking toward the boat. They think it's a ghost, and they realize, it's Jesus. And of course, Peter's always first out of the gate to go, "Hey, I'm in," And Jesus says, "Come to me." And he steps out on the water. And as soon as he does, he turns his face from Jesus and becomes consumed with the danger he's in. The two actions are, one, he was looking at Jesus, he was experiencing supernatural faith, and he was walking on water, which is the kind of an analogy for this living in peace. And then so he takes his eyes off of Jesus, which is one action that's very destructive, and then he turns his eyes toward the danger, as if the guy walking on the water and calling him out couldn't control it all, and didn't perform all the miracles that he had already seen Jesus perform, all of that. But the immediate threat of circumstance often is incredibly powerful to us. So, and we are wired to focus on whatever is threatening us in whatever way. An easy way to understand that is if you have a married man and, you're walking through a park and you have your children and your wife and somebody is going to attack them, you're going to be deadly focused on dealing with that attack. We're wired to not, to survive, right? So, but the problem with that wiring when it's connected with concupiscence is that it draws us out of the realm of God into the realm of our own kind of small world where God isn't. But Jesus was right there. The guy walking on the water, the guy that had healed so many, the guy had performed so many miracles. But the circumstances can be so powerful that even when Jesus is right in front of us, doing a miracle, standing in front of us, it can draw us to the circumstance. And so how do we get out of that cycle? The way we get out of that cycle is we must learn to glue our eyes on him. We must learn to never take our eyes off him. And that begins when we purpose to daily, in a very dedicated way, not on the treadmill, not while walking, not while doing other things, but in a very dedicated way, read the Gospels, reflect on who he is, speak to him about what he reveals to you, respond to him, begin to know and love him, so that then what will normally happen, and I think you will know this because you indicated that this is part of your life already, is that the daily dedicated time begins to bleed into the day.
Amen.
You can't do it the other way around, and you can't have one the bleed, the daily awareness of Jesus in the midst of the difficulty can't be there if you don't dedicate certain time to him and to knowing him on a daily basis. And this is one of the secrets that Alphonsus notes, and he gives credit to St. Teresa of Avila, that will help us habitually orient our heart and mind to know he's present, he's working, I'm going to make it through this. I don't know why it's happening, but he's a good God, and I can trust him.
I think, if I may step out on a limb here, my viewpoint in this is it has a lot to do with love. I think this time that you spend in the morning in this prayer time and you develop and allow yourself to build this love within you, the love is carried through with you throughout the day, and this I find is quite intertwined with the peace. And of course, again, I'm speaking personally, but it is certainly something that is a gift. But it seems to, you've mentioned a couple of times now this reorientation of the compass. I think that compass is always true when you're in this state of love, because you can find love in all circumstances, even the worst. Even my own personal cancer diagnosis. I look back on that and. It was amazing to a lot of people who witnessed me go through that, because I had a supernatural peace almost from day one, with that diagnosis, and it's because I knew that it was gifted to me. If that sounds very strange, but I looked at that, what somebody would consider a tragedy. Maybe an unbearable burden in life. I looked at it as a gift, because I looked at it, or I was able to look at it as something like I was prepared to accept. I don't know how else to explain it, but it grows out of this love from this time spent with him every day.
Well, you're not going out on a limb there. I mean, well, if you are, you're standing there with John on the cross, because that's what he says is the secret to growing faster in the interior life. He said, and I mentioned this in the book, he said, do you want to grow faster? And okay, then if you do, then what do you need to do? You come to know Christ and emulate him and love him. And because of the love that you have for him, the more you love him, the easier it is for you to face all of the purgation that's necessary to make you into a saint and prepare you for heaven in this pilgrimage of life.
Wow.
So you're dead on target. I will just add on to your testimony. I've suffered with life-threatening illness since I was born. I'm presently on life-saving medications, both emergency medications I'm taking right now, and I also take regular medications that if I were deprived of, I would die. Mm-hmm. So I know exactly what you're saying. I've had more surgeries than I can count. The last time I was wheeled into heart surgery, I can honestly say I was at complete peace, and I was prepared. The purpose of my whole mind and heart was, how do I offer this up for as many people as possible? Because I knew I would only be under partial sedation. I knew I would feel some of the discomfort. I hate the way anesthesia feels. I knew I would hate that feeling, and I knew. So as I could see the anesthesia coming down the tube and coming into my body, I was thinking, of all. It's emotional, but I was thinking of all the names of the people that I could give that suffering to, and that's no great nobility. That's just being a Christian. Yeah. That's just participating with Jesus' suffering. It's just adding. It's just joining with his for the salvation of the world. We are, in many ways, the means to his desired ends. Yeah. Our prayer, our suffering, our wrestling with the difficulties of life, we are the means, the chosen means for his desires ends. And when we reject the circumstance, we stop that process of healing. We stop the flow of grace. But when we embrace the circumstance and say, okay, Lord, what do you have for me in this? Now you begin to participate with this glorious redemption of humanity and the world until he comes again.
Oh, beautiful.
It's so true. And I know in one of the questions for reflection at the end of one of your sections, you talk about St. Alphonsus asserting that your conduct in difficulty is the measure of your love for God, which is beautiful. I mean, if you love God, then you're going to behave differently, right? And you can't love God unless, as you say, you practice, some sort of a relationship with God, that you reach out to him, that you ask him things, that you engage in that mental prayer and develop that love for God that makes you totally dependent on him and totally accepting of whatever God wills for you, whatever it may be, whether you understand it or not.
Yeah, I agree. And this is sort of a difficult thing with Catholics, right? We have this very external liturgical kind of reality, devotions and all of that. And they're all good. The liturgy and devotions are all good. But we can get a little lost and those can get in the way instead of helping us when we don't realize that he wants to have a relationship with us. It's not a Protestant idea. The mystics are replete with this, the spiritual doctors like Liguori and Avila and John of the Cross, and just showed us what it meant to live in this kind of really glorious relationship with God. But it's not a relationship with an idea. It's not even a relationship with a religion, though he did establish a religion, and that helps us. But the religious, the divine economy, which is all that he set up to give us his grace, is put into place to lead us to him. So we don't worship the divine economy. The divine economy aids us. And so we have to come to this place where, I'll give you an analogy. If you and I were living, down the street, we started a men's, group, and we were meeting, every week or whatever, and you asked me one day, well, how's Stephanie, which is my wife's name? And I said, she's great. I love her. She's so amazing. And you think, well, that's kind of a weird answer. You just blow it off. Next week, how's Stephanie? she's great. She's amazing. Love her a lot. And then you said, I haven't seen her at Mass. You know, what's going on? She's amazing. She's great. Love her like crazy. Dan, where's your wife? Like, when was the last time you talked to her? Well, she's just so amazing and wonderful. You know, you start to go, hey, dude, there's something wrong. What's going on? Where's your wife? What's wrong? Because you know that if I say I love my wife, that means I actually talk to her, that we actually have a relationship, you know, that we spend time together. And that she's not just this idea that I like, or else there's nothing really there. Now you want to call a mental healthcare professional to evaluate me or something. But we do that as Catholics.
We sure do.
I love the church. I love my faith. Yeah. When was the last time you talked to Jesus?
Uh-huh.
Amen.
But so, I think you guys understand that.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, because it's easy for us to figure out the how-tos and the step-by-steps. But again, unless you enter deeply into that and you give yourself over, and there is a giving over, there is if you want to be in concert with God in uniformity, you really need to exhibit that trust and that complete filial love that is only available through grace that you must pray for.
Yeah, and it's not a one-time act, just to be careful as we communicate this, right? And this is some of the issues with the way Alphonsus communicates it, because it's a hard concept to explain. It's not this one-time act. Okay, I'm in. No, it's okay, I'm in right now, right? I'm in with, for me right now, I'm on emergency medication to keep me alive, right? So, but I can't be all in for today. I can only be all in right in this moment. I can only rejoice in the moment and offer up the suffering I'm experiencing because of this. So now I move into the future. I move into tomorrow, and I'm on a plane, and I'm even more uncomfortable because I'm traveling while I'm sick. And then I have to be in front of people, and I have to speak to the university, and So, but each step of the way, whatever comes, even if I end up in the hospital, which happens to me every other year or so, I have to say, it's good, bring to me the nurse who's struggling with her faith, let me serve you somehow in this, Lord. Let me offer it up. It's a million little acts it's a million little yeses, as Mary so perfectly exemplifies, which is one of the many reasons she's the preeminent disciple of Jesus, is her fiat. It's every day. It's yes. Whatever you give me, Lord, I embrace. Even if I don't like it, and you can say, Lord, I don't like it. I'm not strong enough. I don't help. I believe, but would you help my unbelief? You cry out. You weep. But it's always upward. It's all toward Him, not focusing on the waves, but just saying, I know you see those waves, and they're scaring the hell out of me. And some people go have a cancer diagnosis, and it rattles them to the core because they know they're not ready, right?
Yeah.
But Alphonsus calls us to this moment by moment yielding, this resting in the arms of the one who loves us, this knowledge that this life is just a temporary, assignment that helps us to prepare for heaven. And that is what gives us the power and the grace to overcome. There's a real prominent traditionalist guy who lost his faith. He used to head up this large website, complained every day and all day about the Pope and whatever. And I watched him for years. I even got in a tussle with him once, and he defended me once, which was kind of nice. But in the end, his vision of the world, his vision of Catholicism was combating parties. Like there's just this total human perspective, no sense of the divine, of God doing something bigger that maybe we don't understand. And so that little by little, all of his focus on the circumstance and all of his focus on humanity, all his focus on creation. And even though he was devout enough to start this website and start a, kind of be a part of a movement to better, bring back tradition, whatever, all of that you could say is good, but he lost his faith because he didn't have that deep and I think he's admitted it publicly. I don't have a prayer. I don't do the daily prayers, that sort of thing. That's not how I live. And my answer is, yeah, but then you can't live, and look what it's done to you. And that's the end of what all of us, if we don't draw to mental prayer. And I just want to say, I give away my royalties, so it's not about making money, but I wrote a book called Into the Deep. If people out there are going, I think I understand what you're saying about mental prayer. I don't quite know what this thing is, but I'd like to know more. It's Into the Deep, and it's easier to read than this book. It's super straightforward how the saints have prayed for thousand plus years, and in many cases why they became saints. Folks can pick that up at spiritualdirection.com just to help them if they're wondering, how do I do this?
And you really are describing Into the Deep, because we are again we're dealing with supernatural gifts that we want to participate in. These are things that I wouldn't want to say that we people don't like to hear the fact that you have to work for something, but it really does take time. It does take effort for us to participate in this, and it really is our active participation in it.
It takes time to be married too. It takes time to show, it takes time to have
nobody
a
ever
good marriage.
Nobody ever said marriage is easy. At times it's quite difficult, and that is work. That's a lot of hard work for both parties. But it is something that and what are we really doing? That hard work is changing us. Changing our attitudes about giving up time, because we've been talking about prayer time in spending time. A lot of people say, well, I like to sleep in. So the first thing I did very early on in my faith life was to do the hardest thing, was to get up at an obnoxious time in the morning, because I had to sacrifice something, and I figured, well, that's going to be my sacrifice, and I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning. I went to 4 in the morning, and sometimes even earlier than that, because it's a time where I find peaceful in the day. It's quiet. The house is.
It's exactly what you have to do. Jesus said, if you don't take up your cross daily and follow me, you can't be my disciple. This is one of the reasons I think Liguori is so powerful. Once you get past some of the language that's difficult to understand, is that he doesn't lower the bar, and he does rattle you. I mean, what you just said and what I'm going to say here is, if you're not following Jesus and giving him your life day to day, you're not his disciple.
Yeah.
I mean, Matthew 7 makes that clear, the parable of the 10 virgins. In Luke makes that clear, and we can't delude ourselves. If I love my wife, I spend time with her. If you love God, you spend time with him daily. And if you don't spend time with him daily, you really, it's a legitimate thing to question, but it's not to judge you. It's to call you to a higher standard, which I talk about in the book, which is that call you to actually an authentic standard is better than a higher standard. Authentic. I mean, you just can't. It's not possible to say, well, yeah, I love God, I believe in the Catholic Church, and not go to confession and not go to Mass on Sunday. It's like me saying I love Stephanie and I, I'm totally committed to her, and I don't show up every day. I don't come home to sleep in my bed when I'm in town. I mean, it makes no sense. But somehow we have this ability to, in a negative way, to compartmentalize and to tell ourselves lies. The human person has an infinite capacity for self-delusion, and we give ourselves credit for good intentions, whether we achieve them or not. And, we have this sort of really difficult problem we have to work to overcome. And the only way to overcome it is every day. And this is true for the spiritual life. Every day I've got to orient my compass to him and to know him and to reach for him. And by the way, not perfectly. I mean, I bet you and I could swap stories of hundreds of days where we show up for prayer at, wee hours of the morning, and it just doesn't feel all that great. And it just doesn't go all that well. But that's marriage too. So it's like, well, I don't like this. I'm leaving. Yeah. Well, wait, that's not the Christian ideal. I would even say this. Mental prayer is the hardest thing a person can do as far as spiritual disciplines. And the Catechism says that it's a battle. But when you know that, you have the right expectations. Some days are going to be stormy, and some days are going to be bright and sunny, and some days are going to be easy. But you just show up. That's the secret. Show up every day, and He'll change you.
Yeah, you think about these saints that have suffered the dark night of the soul and have gone through dryness and aridity, and you realize even saints struggle with this, and that's what my destiny is. I'm to be a saint. Dan, I know it has been a quick hour. We're running low on time, but I wanted to point out at the end of the book, you do something that I wish everyone did. And that's, where do we go from here? What's next? What steps can we do? And you really give us some good keys to put some of what we had just read into practice.
Yeah, God be praised. And I just remembered I have a film series I created that's free on how to practice mental prayer, and you can find that at spiritualdirection.com. And look, we provide everything you need. It doesn't matter. Cradle to grave, beginner to advanced. We can even help you if you're safe. So thank you so much for having me on the show, guys. It's been great.
Well, thank you. It's been a blessing.
Yeah, it's been all too brief, just scratching the surface here, and you can check everything out about Dan Burke. You'll be able to find it pretty easily. And in this particular book, Finding Peace in the Storm, available from Sophia Institute Press, you can pick it up at your favorite bookstore or Ignatius or at SophiaInstitutePress.com. And you definitely want to visit the websites that Dan was talking about. And at the end of this book, you have some great resources that you can follow up on as well. So, again, Dan Burke, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Faith with Reasons.
Great to be with you guys.
Thanks, Dan.
And thank you for listening. Again, this show, if you missed, say, the first half, you can listen to the encore 10 o'clock Saturday or listen on demand starting tomorrow on our website.